I never thought a simple Sunday walk with my son would shatter the foundation of my entire life. It started out just like any other weekend. The sun was warm, not too hot, and the air was that perfect mix of spring and leftover winter chill. I remember holding Mason's little hand as we crossed the street, his fingers curled tight around mine. He was telling me about some dinosaur cartoon he loved, his voice full of energy, his feet skipping beside mine. And then, in an instant, everything froze. There was this screech of tires, a blur of silver, and then, he was gone. He wasn't beside me anymore. I heard the sound before I could make sense of what I was seeing. A thud. That horrible, sickening sound. Then Mason's tiny body lying motionless on the pavement, his blue hoodie twisted up around his shoulder. My heart dropped into my stomach and I just screamed. The next few hours were chaos. Sirens, people yelling, my own hands shaking as I held his head in my lap and begged him to wake up. The paramedics said he was breathing, but unconscious. They loaded him into the ambulance and I rode in the back, clutching his tiny hand again, only this time it was limp and cold and I could barely think straight. When we got to the hospital, the doctors acted fast. I watched them wheel him into emergency and I was left outside the room, pacing like a man possessed. The nurse came out, calm but urgent, and told me Mason needed a blood transfusion. They needed a match immediately. Of course, I said. Take mine. I didn't even hesitate. I would have given them every drop in my body if it meant saving him. They rushed me into a small room for testing, drew my blood, asked me a few routine questions. I waited there, sitting on the edge of a plastic chair, trying to pray, trying not to picture the worst. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Then the door opened and a doctor walked in, holding a clipboard and wearing this strange expression, like he didn't quite know how to begin. Mr. Carter, he said, we tested your blood for compatibility, and we ran a quick paternity marker to ensure a genetic match. Okay, I said, confused, but nodding. So, what's the issue? I'm O positive, it should be fine, right? He hesitated. That's not the issue, he said slowly. Your blood type is compatible, but the markers indicate you're not a biological match. We ran it twice. You're not Mason's father. Biologically, I mean. At first I laughed. Just a little. Like he'd made a mistake. A clerical error, a mislabeled vial. There's no way, I said. There's some mistake. Mason is my son. He looked at me, gently but firmly. I understand this is upsetting, and I assure you we verified everything. We double-checked the samples. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry, but the DNA doesn't match. You are not the biological father. I didn't hear the rest of what he said. My ears were ringing, like a bomb had gone off inside my head. I stood there for a second, heart racing, trying to convince myself it was a glitch, a fluke, something easily explained. Maybe I was switched at birth, maybe he was. Maybe the lab messed up. But the voice in the back of my head wouldn't shut up. A darker voice. One that whispered things I didn't want to consider. Lies. Secrets. The kind of things that unravel entire lives. I called Emma, my wife, from the hallway. I was shaking so hard I could barely hit her number. She answered on the second ring. Hey, what's going on? How's Mason? She asked. I told her he'd been hit by a car. That we were at the hospital. That he needed a transfusion. I didn't tell her everything else yet. Not over the phone. Not like that. She arrived 40 minutes later, pale and frantic, eyes wild. She ran straight to Mason's room and clutched his hand like she was holding onto the last piece of the world. I watched her, a lump rising in my throat, because in that moment she looked exactly like a terrified mother. Not someone keeping secrets. Not someone hiding anything. But I had to ask. Emma, I said quietly, pulling her aside. They ran some blood tests to check compatibility. She nodded. Of course. They said I'm not his biological father. She blinked. What? They said the DNA doesn't match. That I'm not Mason's biological parent. She stared at me like I was speaking a different language. For a second, I saw genuine confusion in her face. Then she shook her head. No, that's not possible, she said. There's no way. I gave birth to him. He's yours, James. I'm telling you what they told me. The tests. They're sure. And then, something changed in her expression. Doubt. Not about me. About herself. Wait, she whispered, stepping back, her face suddenly pale. Wait a second, if you're not, then we should test me too. I looked at her, not understanding. Why? Because if they made a mistake with you, maybe they made a mistake with me too. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe we were both about to be told we were strangers to the child we raised together. The doctors agreed to run the tests. They took Emma's blood and told us it would take an hour. We sat there in silence, Mason unconscious in the bed beside us, machines beeping in the background. I looked at the boy I had taught to ride a bike, who I'd stayed up all night with during his first fever, who had my eyes, or so I'd always thought, and I felt this deep ache I couldn't even describe. Because whether the test was right or wrong, I loved him. I loved him like he was carved out of my soul. None of that changed. But then the door opened again. And the same doctor walked in, the same grave expression on his face. Only this time, his eyes darted between both of us. I'm very sorry, he said quietly. But Mrs. Carter, you are also not a biological match. You are not Mason's mother. The room spun. What are you saying? Emma whispered. That we're both not. The doctor nodded. There must have been a mix-up. At the hospital. During delivery. We believe your child was accidentally switched with another. I know this is incredibly difficult to hear, and we will do everything we can to help you navigate what comes next. And just like that, everything we thought we knew crumbled. We weren't Mason's parents. Not biologically. Not by blood. But he was still our son. And I had no idea what to do next. The first thing I felt was numbness. Not anger, not sadness, just this cold, paralyzing numbness spreading through me like ice water. I sat there beside Mason's hospital bed, watching the monitors blink, hearing the rhythmic beeping that reminded me he was still alive, still here, even as everything else around me crumbled. Emma didn't speak. She sat across from me, hunched forward, hands shaking in her lap. Her face was as white as the hospital walls, her eyes locked on Mason's tiny chest rising and falling. And for the first time since I met her, she looked lost. Like a person without a map. And I knew the feeling all too well in that moment. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to your wife when the child you've both loved and raised turns out to belong to neither of you? The doctor had left the room after giving us the results, saying they'd be launching an internal investigation, that the hospital would contact legal and work with us to determine what happened and when. But all I could focus on was Mason. My son. The boy I carried on my shoulders every 4th of July. The boy who made me laugh when I came home too tired from work to smile. He wasn't mine. He wasn't Emma's. But he was ours. At least he had been. Until now. Emma finally broke the silence. So, whose child is he? She asked, barely louder than a whisper. I shook my head. I don't know. She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes were glossy, red-rimmed, filled with something beyond confusion, grief, I think. Not because Mason wasn't hers, but because something sacred had been violated without either of us ever knowing. I remember holding him, she said, her voice trembling. Right after the birth. I remember them placing him on my chest. I remember counting his fingers and toes. I nodded. I remember the look on your face when they handed him to you. Like you were holding the whole universe. She let out a shaky breath. So, what now? I didn't have an answer. All I could think about was how many times I'd told Mason I loved him. How many bedtime stories, how many scraped knees, how many kisses on the forehead before school. None of that was fake. None of that was a lie. But it still didn't explain how this could have happened. Later that evening, 2 hospital administrators came to our room, an older woman with silver hair and a younger man who looked fresh out of law school. They introduced themselves, apologized profusely, and explained they'd opened a full investigation. They believed it was a case of accidental neonatal switch, something I'd only ever heard about in those rare, tragic news stories that felt like fiction. It's extremely rare, the woman said gently. But it has happened in the past. We'll be reviewing all the delivery records from that day, including security footage, staff rosters, and ID bans. And what does that mean for us? I asked. It means, the younger man said carefully, there may be another couple out there, raising your biological child. That hit like a punch to the stomach. Another child. Our child. Flesh and blood. Out there. Somewhere. Living a life that should have been ours to shape. And yet. Mason was lying right there in front of me. He was no less real, no less mine. Emma put her hand on mine. I don't care whose DNA he has, she said. He's our son. I nodded slowly, squeezing her fingers. He is. But beneath my agreement, there was a gnawing feeling. I needed to know. Not because I loved Mason less, but because this wasn't just about love. It was about truth. About identity. About a part of me I didn't even know was missing until that moment. 2 days later, Mason woke up. The moment his eyes fluttered open and he looked at me, weak and confused, I felt everything else melt away. He whispered, "Dad," in this hoarse, scared little voice, and I leaned in close and said, "I'm here, buddy. I'm not going anywhere." Emma cried. I held her and Mason at the same time, our arms tangled in this strange, fragile knot that somehow still felt like family. We didn't tell him anything, of course. How could we? He was just a kid. His world didn't need to break along with ours. In the days that followed, the hospital kept us updated. Quietly, respectfully, with the kind of caution you reserve for people balancing on the edge of something massive. They confirmed that there were 2 births at nearly the exact same time in the maternity ward 5 years ago. 2 boys. Similar weights. Similar APGAR scores. Both healthy. And somehow, somewhere between delivery and discharge, the ID bans got switched. They told us they were reaching out to the other family. I didn't know what to feel. Excitement. Dread. Terror. Hope. Emma and I barely slept. We'd lie in bed beside each other, staring at the ceiling, sometimes talking in whispers, sometimes saying nothing at all. She confessed to feeling guilty, like she should have noticed something. I should have known he wasn't mine, she said one night, her voice cracking. Mothers are supposed to know these things, right? No, I told her firmly. You're his mother. That's what you knew. That's what matters. We both cried that night. Quietly. Side by side. Mourning a truth we'd never known, grieving something that had never technically belonged to us, but had been ours all the same. A week later, the hospital called. They had identified the other family. The boy we'd been raising was named Mason Carter. But our biological son, our flesh and blood, was named Noah. Noah Harper. The other couple had agreed to a meeting. A supervised one. Neutral location. A counselor would be present, they said. For emotional support. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I'd want to hug them or scream. If I'd feel jealous or guilty or relieved. I just knew I had to see them. I had to see him. My son. And I had no idea what it would do to me. I don't know what I expected the day we met them. I guess in my mind, I kept imagining something cinematic, 2 families walking into a quiet room, eyes meeting across the space, everyone instantly knowing who belongs to whom. A dramatic music swell, maybe even a tearful embrace. But real life isn't like that. Real life is awkward and messy and filled with pauses too long and silences too sharp. Emma and I sat in the counseling room, waiting. Her hand was wrapped around mine so tightly my fingers were going numb, but I didn't ask her to loosen her grip. I needed it too. The door opened and a woman stepped in, mid-30s, short brown hair, nervous eyes, and behind her came her husband, tall, square-shouldered, holding the hand of a little boy who looked just like me when I was his age. I stopped breathing. That was my son. Noah. The boy we'd never brought home from the hospital. The boy we never knew existed. He had my nose. Emma's chin. Something in the way he looked around the room reminded me of Mason when he was scared, wide-eyed and clinging to familiarity. Only this boy wasn't clinging to me. He didn't even know who I was. The counselor spoke first, gently guiding us all into our seats and setting the tone, but I barely heard her. My eyes kept drifting back to the boy. His parents introduced themselves. Mark and Rachel Harper. He was an architect. She worked part-time at a nonprofit. They'd lived in the same city as us all along. Just on the other side of town. 10 miles away. I don't even know where to begin, Mark said, clearing his throat, his voice thick. We're trying to process all this. We got the call and it just didn't seem real. We thought it had to be a mistake. Rachel nodded. When they told us the blood test didn't match, I thought maybe they'd mixed up the samples. It didn't even cross my mind that Noah might not be ours. Emma leaned forward, her voice quiet but steady. We felt the same way. Mason, he's our whole world. And to think he isn't biologically ours, it crushed us. The counselor guided the conversation gently. She reminded us this wasn't about blame. That this wasn't about who raised the child better or who deserved what. It was about truth, and healing, and figuring out a path forward. But how do you chart a path through a forest you never even knew you were lost in? Noah didn't say much during the meeting. He sat quietly, leaning into his mom's side, watching Emma and me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I wanted to reach out to him, to say something, anything, but I knew it was too soon. He didn't know me. I wasn't his dad. Not in any way that mattered to him yet. Still, something strange happened when he finally looked at me directly. His eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, the room faded away. I saw something there. Recognition, maybe. Or maybe that was just my heart reaching for something it desperately wanted to find. When the meeting ended, we agreed to keep in touch. The counselor suggested gradual steps, maybe a park meetup, another visit, something low pressure for the kids. Mason didn't know anything yet. Neither did Noah. We were all still processing. That night, Emma and I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, just like we had so many nights before. What if he doesn't want anything to do with us? Emma asked, her voice small, brittle. I turned to her. He's 5, Em. It's not about what he wants right now. It's about what's right. We owe it to both of them, to all of us, to figure this out. She nodded slowly, eyes glassy. I carried a baby inside me for 9 months. I sang to him. I talked to him. I felt every kick. And now I don't even know where the child was for the first 5 years of his life. I reached out and pulled her close. He's out there. And we're going to meet him. We'll get to know him. It'll take time. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. We met again the following week. This time at a park. Neutral ground, open air, space for the boys to play if they wanted. We hadn't told Mason anything yet, just that we were meeting new friends. When Mason saw Noah, something changed in his expression. A moment of pause. A blink, maybe 2. And then, curiosity. They looked at each other like they were looking in a slightly warped mirror. Hey, Mason said, walking over. Hi, Noah replied. They stood there awkwardly for a second before Mason picked up a soccer ball lying nearby and passed it to him. And just like that, they were playing. Kicking, laughing, chasing. Like they'd known each other forever. Emma started crying. Rachel saw her and wiped her own eyes. It's strange, isn't it? Seeing them together. Like fate decided they had to meet. Mark crossed his arms. I keep wondering what happens next. I mean, what does this mean for them? For us. I didn't have an answer. No one did. Over the next few weeks, the meetings continued. Sometimes at parks, sometimes over lunch. The boys grew closer, oblivious to the gravity surrounding them. They were just kids. Innocent. Unburdened. But Emma and we started feeling that tension more and more. The elephant in the room was always the same. Do we tell them? Do we look into their eyes and say, you're not who you think you are? The counselor advised caution. There's no right time, she said. But you'll know when it feels like your time. Just make sure you're united when it happens. That night, Emma and I sat Mason down on the couch. He had his favorite stuffed dinosaur clutched to his chest and chocolate ice cream still smeared on his chin. Hey buddy, I said gently. Can we talk to you for a minute? He looked up at us, wide-eyed but calm. Am I in trouble? No, Emma said quickly, pulling him into her lap. You're not in trouble at all. I took a deep breath. You know how we've been seeing those new friends lately? Noah and his parents. He nodded. Yeah. Noah's cool. He's kinda like me. I smiled. He is kind of like you. And that's because, well, there's something we need to tell you. Something very important. Something that might be a little confusing but will help you understand. Mason's brow furrowed. What? And I hesitated, just for a moment, because once I said it, nothing would ever be the same again. I looked at Mason, his eyes big and full of trust, his little fingers wrapped around the tail of his stuffed dinosaur, and for a moment, I almost backed out. Almost said, never mind, bud. Nothing important. But that would have been a lie. And after everything we'd just been through, after everything we were still going through, the one thing I couldn't do was lie to him. Remember when you were in the hospital? I said slowly. After the accident. And they had to do blood tests. He nodded, his eyes flicking between me and Emma. Well, when they ran those tests, the doctors found out something we didn't know before. Something no one knew. Not even us. Emma's arms tightened around him. She was shaking. What? He whispered. I looked him straight in the eyes. Mason, you're not our biological son. He blinked. What does that mean? It means, Emma said, her voice trembling but steady, that when you were born, there was a mistake at the hospital. The babies got switched. We brought you home, but you weren't the baby I gave birth to. Mason stared at us. Not angry. Not even upset. Just confused. But I'm still me. Yes, I said quickly. You're still you. You're still our Mason. We've loved you every single day of your life. That's never going to change. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he asked, then who are my real parents? Emma flinched at the word real, but I put my hand on her knee to steady her. We're still your parents. We raised you. We love you. But there's another family, Rachel and Mark, and they're the ones you were born to. Just like Noah was born to us. Mason looked down at his dinosaur, rubbing the fabric between his fingers. Is that why I don't look like you? My throat tightened. It's one of the reasons. Yeah. He looked back up at me, eyes wet. Are you gonna send me away? I reached for him immediately, pulling him into my arms, holding him so tight I thought I might break. Never. Never, Mason. You're my son. My boy. No piece of paper or blood test is gonna change that. He cried then, finally letting it out. And Emma and I cried with him. The next few days were hard. Mason was quieter. He still played with his toys and laughed at cartoons, but there was a heaviness in him now, like his little shoulders were carrying more than they should. We tried to keep things normal, school drop-offs, dinners, bedtime stories, but we also kept talking, checking in, letting him ask questions when he was ready. A week later, he finally said he wanted to see Noah again. So we arranged a meeting at a quiet indoor play center, a place with big colorful mats and foam blocks and a corner where parents could sip coffee and watch. We got there first. Mason clung to my hand tightly until he saw Noah walk in. Then, without a word, he let go and ran toward him. I'll never forget that moment. Noah turned, smiled, and they hugged. Just hugged. Like something in their little hearts already knew the truth we'd just started understanding ourselves. Rachel and Mark joined us at the coffee table. None of us spoke at first. We just watched the boys laugh and chase each other, like nothing had changed, because for them, maybe nothing really had. They weren't burdened by the logistics, or the court documents, or the fear. They were just two kids who'd found something familiar in each other. I guess they know more than we think, Rachel finally said. Maybe better than we do, I replied, watching as Mason handed Noah a foam sword and started mock fighting. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So, what do we do? Going forward. Emma and I had talked about that a lot over the past week. We'd argued. Cried. Agonized over the what-ifs. We think, she said, looking at me for confirmation, that we keep things open. Let the boys keep seeing each other. Keep talking. Let them guide the pace. And eventually? Rachel asked. Do we tell Noah? That was the hardest part. Because as difficult as it had been to tell Mason, we'd had 5 years of love and trust built up. We knew how to talk to him. Noah didn't know us. Not really. I think we should, I said. But not yet. Not until we've spent more time together. Not until he knows we're not just strangers trying to steal him. Rachel's eyes welled up. He's our whole life. Emma reached over, gently touched her hand. Mason is ours too. But we can share. We have to share. For them. We agreed on weekly meetups. Some just the boys, some with all of us. The counselor offered to help the transition, to talk to the kids if needed. Slowly, cautiously, our lives started blending in small ways. There were still challenges. At school, Mason got in a fight with a classmate who said something about fake families after overhearing 2 moms gossiping in the parking lot. I had to pick him up early. He wouldn't stop crying the whole way home. I'm not fake, he kept saying. You're still my dad, right? Always, I whispered. He nodded, but I could tell a part of him still didn't believe it. The hardest moment came a month later. Mason walked into the kitchen while I was making breakfast and asked, out of nowhere, why didn't the hospital tell you sooner? Why did it take me getting hit by a car to find out the truth? I stopped flipping the pancakes. My heart pounded. I don't know, I admitted. Sometimes the world makes mistakes. Big ones. But that doesn't mean we love you any less. He nodded slowly, then climbed onto a stool and said, can we have both families over for dinner? It was such a simple question. So pure. And so heavy with meaning. We'll ask them, I said, turning back to the stove. I think that's a great idea. That dinner happened the following weekend. It was awkward. Tense at first. The kids were fine, running through the house, bouncing on the couch, giggling like always, but the adults, we were still walking through a fog none of us had asked to be in. Mark complimented Emma's cooking. Rachel brought a homemade pie. We talked about school, cartoons, favorite colors. Carefully avoided words like switch and lawsuit and birth. But as the night went on, the tension eased. Laughter started to sound less forced. Stories flowed more freely. For the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could actually do this. Later that night, after the house was quiet and Mason was asleep, I stood in his room for a long time, watching him breathe. His little chest rising and falling, the corner of his mouth twitching in some dream. Emma joined me, her hand finding mine in the dark. Do you think he's going to be okay? She whispered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I think he already is. I think we all are. Eventually. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Because the next conversation we'd have to face would be with Noah. And this time, we'd have to tell someone else's child that everything he thought he knew about who he was about to change. I don't know how you're supposed to tell a 5-year-old that the people he calls mom and dad aren't the ones who brought him into this world. There's no manual for that. No how-to guide. Just raw fear, sleepless nights, and the constant ache in your chest that tells you no matter how gently you say it, you're going to break something innocent. Emma and I met with Rachel and Mark 2 weeks after the dinner. The boys had already fallen into a rhythm, like brothers separated at birth and now reunited by some strange twist of fate. They had their own jokes, their own games, their own language that didn't require adult supervision. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Rachel poured coffee for everyone, her hand shaking just enough for me to notice. We sat around their kitchen table while the kids played in the next room, their laughter echoing faintly through the walls. We've been talking about it, Rachel began, her voice soft. And we think, it's time. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's not that we want to rush it. But the longer we wait, the harder it'll be. He deserves the truth. Emma nodded. We agree. But we should all be there. All four of us. So he doesn't feel alone. And so it was decided. We would tell Noah. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining his face, the confusion, the questions he would ask, the ones we wouldn't be able to answer. How do you explain something so complex to someone so small? How do you comfort a child while tearing apart the very foundation of his identity? We met at the counselor's office, a neutral space, warm and full of light. There were toys, books, colorful bean bags. But none of it could soften the moment that was coming. Noah sat on the rug, legs crossed, playing with a puzzle while the four of us stood nearby, silently rehearsing the words we were about to speak. The counselor, a calm woman named Diana, knelt beside him. Hey, Noah. Can we talk for a little bit? He looked up, curious but not scared. Okay. Rachel and Mark sat down beside him, and Emma and I followed, sitting across from them. I saw his eyes flick between us, puzzled. He knew who we were, of course, Mason's parents. But this wasn't playtime. He could sense it. Noah, Rachel began, her voice thick with emotion, we have something important to tell you. Something a little confusing, but really important. He nodded, still innocent, still trusting. She reached for his hand. You know how you and Mason are really close? Yeah, he smiled. He's my best friend. Emma's eyes welled up at that, and she looked down quickly. Well, there's a reason you two feel so close, Rachel said. Something very special connects you. When you were both born, at the hospital, there was a mistake. A big one. Noah tilted his head. A mistake. I leaned forward. Yes, buddy. When you were born, the hospital accidentally mixed things up. They gave you to Rachel and Mark, and they gave Mason to us. His eyes widened. But you're Mason's dad, he said slowly. And you're Mason's mom, he added, pointing to Emma. I am, Emma said, her voice shaking. But I'm also your birth mom. He blinked, his mouth opening slightly. What? Rachel wiped her eyes. Sweetheart, we raised you, we love you with all our hearts, and nothing will ever change that. But the truth is, you came from Emma's tummy, not mine. Noah stared at all of us, stunned silent. The puzzle pieces in front of him suddenly forgotten. For a few seconds, he didn't say a word. And then he whispered, does that mean I don't belong? The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Emma reached for him, scooting closer. No, baby. You belong. You always belong. You're loved. You have two moms who love you. Two dads. And a brother. You're not losing anyone. He looked up at Rachel and Mark, panic rising in his voice. Are you sending me away? Mark's face crumbled. He pulled Noah into his arms. Never, kiddo. Never. You're our son. You're staying with us. We just want you to know where you came from. We're not losing you, we're just making more room for love. Noah cried then. Great big sobs that shook his little shoulders. And we let him cry. We held him. All four of us. Not caring who held who, not caring what titles we wore. Just human beings, wrapped in pain and love and something deeper than either, truth. After a while, he calmed down. I want to play with Mason now, he whispered. Of course, Rachel said gently. As he left the room, the silence that followed was heavy. Diana turned to us. He's going to need time. But he's strong. And he's surrounded by love. That's what matters. Later that day, Emma and I sat on the couch, silent, our hands intertwined. The TV was on, but we weren't watching. Our eyes were glazed, our minds spinning. He didn't look at me the same way, she said softly. He looked scared. He's just confused. It's a lot. I know, she whispered. But still. I saw it. Like I was a stranger. I didn't have the right words to fix that, so I didn't try. I just held her hand tighter. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Noah didn't ask for us much. He kept his distance. Mason tried to help, pulling him into games, sharing his toys, telling him silly jokes. But the bond they'd built before the truth came out now carried an invisible weight. Still, they didn't let go of each other. One Saturday, while we were at the park, Noah walked up to me while I was sitting on a bench. He stood there for a minute, kicking a rock with his shoe. Finally, he asked, "Do you think we look alike?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked. His nose, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his mouth. "A little," I said. "But that's not what matters." He sat beside me. "I think I want to come to your house sometime. Like, just me." My heart swelled. "I'd love that, Noah." He nodded. "Do you have cookies?" I laughed, even as my eyes watered. "The best ones. And I'll even let you eat too." He smiled. That smile told me everything I needed to know. There was still hope. Hope for healing. Hope for connection. Hope that, even though the world had twisted our lives into something unrecognizable, we were slowly untangling the knots, one small, quiet moment at a time. And for the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe we could build something whole again, even if it started in pieces. The first time Noah spent the night at our house, I don't think I slept more than an hour. Emma cooked his favorite pasta, Rachel had texted us the recipe, and I built a pillow fort in the living room with Mason. The two boys crawled in with flashlights and comic books, giggling and whispering until they both passed out mid-sentence. I sat on the couch just watching them, barely able to believe how far we'd come. From strangers to, whatever this was. A shared life that didn't follow the rules. Emma sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. "He looks so peaceful when he sleeps," she said. "Like all the weight falls off him at night. I hope he always feels that safe here." She nodded, but I could feel the tension in her body. "He called me Emma tonight," she whispered. I turned to her. "Not Mom." She shook her head slowly. It stung more than I thought it would. I didn't know what to say. Maybe there was nothing to say. This journey wasn't just confusing for the boys, it was tearing up the adults too. We were redefining everything. Family. Love. Identity. And there wasn't a single part of it that came easy. The next morning, over pancakes, Noah surprised us both. He was quiet for a while, picking at his food, then he looked at me and said, "Why did it happen?" "What do you mean?" I asked gently. "The switch. Why did they mess it up?" I glanced at Emma. She froze, fork midair. I sighed and leaned forward. "Nobody knows exactly how it happened, Noah. It was a terrible mistake. The hospital was very busy that day. There was confusion with the baby's bracelets. Someone mixed them up. And nobody realized until much later." He frowned. "That's not fair." "No, it's not," I said softly. "It's not your fault. It's not Mason's fault. And it's not ours either. But we're all trying to make the best of it." He nodded. Then he asked a question I'll never forget. "If I'm not your real son, will you still love me?" Emma's breath hitched. I got down on one knee beside him, took both of his little hands in mine, and looked straight into his eyes. "Noah, listen to me. You're not just some kid who showed up in our life. You are part of us now. Blood doesn't decide love. I didn't raise you, but I would fight for you like I did. I will always be here for you. No matter what." His eyes filled, and he threw his arms around my neck, holding tight. I felt Emma kneel down behind me, wrapping both of us in her arms. That moment, that raw, desperate hug, mattered more than anything else. He didn't need DNA. He needed to know he was wanted. That weekend, everything felt a little easier. The boys laughed louder. Emma smiled more. And for the first time in months, I caught myself imagining a future where we didn't just coexist, we thrived. But life has a way of throwing curveballs just when you start to feel steady. One morning, about a week later, I got a call from the hospital. The same hospital where the boys were born. "Mr. Carter," the voice on the other end said. This is Olivia from Memorial Hospital. I'm calling regarding your recent inquiry about the birth mix-up. I hadn't made an inquiry. Not officially. But apparently, someone had. I'm sorry. I said, confused. I didn't. We received a formal request to re-examine the records from your son's birth. We were able to locate the staff log and internal documentation from the maternity ward that day. Something came up, something we think you should be aware of. My stomach dropped. What is it? There's a discrepancy. A nurse flagged an issue with the bracelet tags the day you were discharged. It was recorded but never followed up on. Her report shows that she questioned the baby IDs before release, but her concerns were overruled by a supervisor. I felt the blood drain from my face. Emma saw the look on my face and mouthed, "What's wrong?" Can you send me that report?" I asked the woman. "Yes. Anne." "Mr. Carter?" "There's something else. The nurse who wrote that report, her name is Diane Mercer. She doesn't work with us anymore. But I found her contact information, in case you'd like to speak with her directly." When I hung up, I told Emma everything. We sat in stunned silence. "Someone knew," she whispered. "Someone knew something was wrong and let us walk out with the wrong baby anyway. Looks like it." She stood up, pacing the room. "This wasn't just an accident. This was negligence. A nurse tried to stop it. And they ignored her." I nodded, the weight of it hitting me like a wave. Rachel and Mark deserved to know. So that night, we sat them down and told them everything, about the report, the ignored warning, the name of the nurse. Rachel's hands trembled as she clutched the paper. They knew. They could have stopped it. Mark clenched his jaw. "We need to find that nurse. Talk to her. Understand what happened." So we did. Emma made the call, and a few days later, Diane Mercer agreed to meet with us. We all drove together, Emma, Rachel, Mark, and me, to a quiet coffee shop just outside the city. Diane was in her early 60s now, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She didn't look surprised to see us. It was almost like she'd been waiting for this moment too. "I remember that day like it was yesterday," she said, stirring her tea. "Two boys, born within minutes of each other. One had a little birthmark on his shoulder, the other didn't. But the tags were wrong. I knew they were wrong." She looked at Rachel. "I told my supervisor. I showed her. But she said the paperwork had already been processed, and there was too much chaos in the ward. She told me to let it go." Emma's face turned red. "Let it go? You let us take home the wrong child." "I didn't," Diane said calmly. "She did. I filed a report. I even tried to follow up a week later, but I was told to drop it." Rachel was crying now. "You could have changed everything." "I know," Diane said, eyes full of sorrow. "And I'm sorry. I've lived with that guilt for a long time. But I wasn't allowed to say anything. They threatened to fire me." Mark leaned forward. "Then why are you telling us now?" "Because someone finally asked. And because I'm retiring this year, and I don't want to carry this with me any longer." She slid a folder across the table. "Everything I documented. Copies I kept for myself. In case this day ever came. We took it. Read every page. Her notes. Her diagrams. The time-stamped warnings. It was all there. Proof. They knew." When we walked out of that cafe, none of us spoke. The air around us had changed. Heavier. More dangerous. Rachel broke the silence first. "We're suing the hospital." Emma nodded. "I'm with you." Mark looked at me. "You in?" I looked back at that building, and then at the folder in my hand. "Yes," I said. "I want justice. For the boys. For all of us." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake one thought from my mind. If the hospital covered this up for 5 years, what else were they hiding? The day we filed the lawsuit, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage exactly, but something colder, resolve. After months of confusion, lies, and emotional whiplash, we finally had direction. Something real to hold on to. The truth wasn't just ours anymore. We were going to make it public. The legal team said we had a strong case. Hospital negligence. Emotional distress. Life-altering consequences. And with the report from Diane Mercer, the retired nurse who'd tried to stop the switch, the foundation was rock solid. But lawsuits move slowly. In the meantime, life kept going. Mason and Noah knew something was happening. We hadn't told them about the court case in full detail, but kids are smarter than we give them credit for. They could feel the tension in the air. The long phone calls. The whispered meetings. The way Rachel and Emma grew quiet every time the boys entered the room. One night, I found Mason sitting on the back porch, staring up at the stars. "Hey," I said, easing down beside him. "What's on your mind?" He was quiet for a second, then said, "Is Noah still my brother?" The question shattered me. I took a long breath and replied, "That's up to you too. But I think brothers are more than just who you were born next to. They're who you grow with. Who you protect. Who you love." He nodded slowly. "Okay. I don't want to lose him." "You won't," I said, placing my arm around his shoulder. "Not if we can help it." The night of the court hearing finally came. The courtroom was quiet, sterile, filled with polished wooden benches and cold white lights. The hospital's legal team looked like they were built out of stone, stoic, calculated, impersonal. We, on the other hand, looked like real people. Tired, angry, hurting, but united. Rachel gave testimony first. Her voice cracked when she talked about the day she gave birth. The way they wheeled her out of recovery and handed her a baby she never doubted was hers. The sleepless nights. The scraped knees. The birthday cakes. Emma followed. She spoke about the car accident. The transfusion. The moment we learned Mason wasn't biologically ours. Then she paused, fighting tears, and said, "But he is ours. In every way that matters. And I will spend the rest of my life protecting him." Then it was my turn. I took the stand, heart pounding, and told our story. Every moment. Every betrayal. Every revelation. I didn't hold back. When I got to the part about Noah asking, "Will you still love me?" I broke. Right there in front of everyone. "I would have given my life for that boy before I knew he wasn't mine," I said, my voice cracking. Finding out he wasn't didn't make me love him less. It made me realize how much of a father I already was. There was silence after I finished. No more legal jargon. Just truth hanging in the air. The hospital's defense was weak. Technicalities. Procedure missteps. They tried to distance themselves from responsibility, but the documents Diane had provided were undeniable. The internal memo. The ignored red flags. The names. We won the case. The judge ruled in our favor, awarding damages and ordering a full internal audit of the hospital's maternity ward. But honestly, the money didn't matter. Not to me. What mattered was what came next. Freedom. Clarity. Choice. But victory didn't bring peace as quickly as I thought it would. Because now that the dust had settled, we had to decide what life would look like moving forward. Emma and I had grown close again. Closer than we'd been in years. But something was still fragile between us. We hadn't fully healed. And now there were questions neither of us could ignore. Would Rachel and Mark want Noah back? Full-time? Would we fight for Mason? Could we keep splitting their lives in two? One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, the four of us sat down at the kitchen table. "We can't keep dragging them back and forth," Mark said. "It's not fair." "I agree," I said. "But what's the alternative?" "You take one. We take the other." "No," Rachel said quickly. "That would destroy them." Emma leaned in. "Then we need to think bigger. What if we do this together?" Rachel blinked. "What do you mean?" "Co-parent. As one big unit. No more separation. The boys live in one house, and we take turns staying there with them. Or, we all stay. Mark raised an eyebrow. Like a commune. Emma laughed, a little too hard. Not exactly. Just, shared custody. Open hearts. Less traditional, maybe, but more stable. It sounded crazy at first. But the more we talked, the more it made sense. We had spent so long trying to untangle our lives from this mess, but maybe that was the wrong approach. Maybe, just maybe, the answer wasn't to pull apart, but to weave together. And the boys? They loved it. The next few months were weird, I won't lie. Scheduling was a nightmare. We had disagreements over routines, chores, screen time. But the important things, the dinners together, the family game nights, the shared birthdays, those started to feel good. Right. Whole. We created a new rhythm. Not perfect. Not easy. But real. One night, after Mason and Noah had fallen asleep under the same blanket watching cartoons, I looked across the room and met Emma's eyes. She smiled at me. Not the strained smile of a tired co-parent. But the real one. The one I hadn't seen in years. And I realized something I hadn't let myself feel fully until then. I still loved her. The next day, I took her out for coffee. Just the two of us. No legal documents. No kids. No drama. I told her everything I'd been holding back. I don't know what we are anymore, I said, hands wrapped around my mug. But I know I don't want to go through the rest of this without you. She took my hand, looked down at our fingers, and said, then don't. It wasn't a big dramatic kiss. Or a movie moment. It was quiet. Simple. Like breathing again after holding it too long. A few weeks later, the four of us, Emma, Rachel, Mark, and I, stood on a small stage at the hospital. They invited us to speak to the new staff during training. As part of their new accountability policy. I told our story again, not out of anger this time, but hope. This started with a mistake, I said. But it doesn't have to end that way. Our children deserve better. And so do yours. When we left that building for the last time, I felt something leave me. The grief. The confusion. The bitterness. In its place, something new had taken root. Not closure exactly. But peace. We didn't get the life we planned. But we built one anyway. Together. And I wouldn't trade it for anything.